The Southern African Development Community, or SADC, is holding an extraordinary summit to address escalating post-election violence in Mozambique amid widespread allegations of vote rigging and political interference by the ruling Frelimo party. The opposition in that country has been protesting after the Electoral Commission announced that Frelimo and its presidential candidate won the elections. Now, the high-level summit hosted in Harare will focus on resolving Mozambique's political and security crisis alongside other regional challenges, such as the SADC Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, whose mandate expires soon. The question is, can SADC resolve the Mozambican political impasse? Well, to discuss this matter, we are joined by Zimbabwean academic, author and publisher, as well as the convener of the SAPES Trust Policy Dialogue Forum, Professor Ibbo Mandaza. Professor Mandaza, it's a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Certainly, watching from our perspective, one cannot but help feel worried about what we're seeing unfolding in Mozambique. But the question to you is should the region be worrying about this?
Certainly, rather belatedly, but it also demonstrates that SADC has become rather lame compared to earlier versions of SADC when there was firm leadership in the region. I'm talking the era of Nyerere, Kaunda. We have a very amorphous SADC now, indecisive and almost immersed in its own mess, overwhelmed by its own failure. So that we see from election to election in the region, we go back to Zimbabwe's election last year, which SADC Observer Mission itself condemned, and right to the Mozambican ones, which are a complete disaster at the moment, and over 40 people killed, and you have a situation in which SADC has been rather slow. And when they've taken action, the action is meaningless. And we have a summit taking place today, hardly a quorum, if one may use that term, for heads of state who should be attending, an emergency extraordinary summit, only 4 out of 15 heads of state attending.
Yeah.
That tells you how serious SADC is, if it is serious at all.
It is a big concern because if we look at SADC's track record in the face of escalating crises that we've seen unfolding, it's not great. I mean, do you think that SADC is actually up to the task of addressing these ongoing regional setbacks? I mean, when we look at Mozambique, your response to the first answer was very much so spot on. It's almost too late at this point.
Yes, SADC is no longer fit for purpose, in my view. One has to rethink SADC as an organization. It's depressing, but everything speaks for itself. We have the summit today, but it's highly unlikely that you have a resolution of the crisis that they're talking about. The DRC has been simmering for a long time. You know, where neighboring countries have been raiding that country for years, since the 90s. And then you have Mozambique more urgently in that you have a situation where elections are disputed, and yet the Troika yesterday, the SADC Troika yesterday, virtually blessed the election, which is disputed. So it's interesting to know and see what happens today.
Yeah.
Does the summit, or whatever you call it, endorse the decision of the Troika, or demand that the elections be rerun, or, as was recommended in our policy dialogue on the 31st of October, that one needs to re-examine the electoral process, including the possibility of actually recounting. And more important, institute a dialogue among Mozambicans urgently. Yeah. And that would be the least one would have expected, not a blessing of the election, which is disputed and in which more than 40 people have been killed.
Indeed.
You know?
There's so many reports that are coming out. I mean, obviously, there are many issues that we can look to. I mean, obviously, you're saying exactly what we're reading is that, you know, when you look at the AU and SADC, the observation missions commended the electoral process and urging everybody to accept the result. But when you look at the other side, obviously, you've got the opposition parties that are saying, no, it wasn't free and fair. These were rigged. You also had the likes of the EU election observer mission and several other opposition candidates, NGOs, elements of civil society, saying that these elections were rigged. But it's amazing the contrast that you're having between what SADC is saying and what so many other organizations are saying, that these were actually rigged elections. I mean, obviously we need the proof of that, but people have died. Media has also there's been a lot of blackouts on reporting on what's been going on. You know, these are worrying situations. Do you, again, think that these SADC electoral observer missions got it wrong with their analysis on the elections?
Well, it's laughable in many respects, except that this is also tragic, what's happening before us. But what we're seeing before us is a demonstration of the extent to which SADC, as an organization, is bankrupt, completely helpless. And the Mozambican situation is a repeat of the Zimbabwe elections of last year. And so you can't expect people who have been as been so incompetent in their own elections to judge other people's elections. It's impossible. You know, it's farcical in my view.
Yeah.
And so the tragedy continues, and it leaves us very, very, very depressed as to what can be done. We feel that something urgently has to be done, and I think the least that can be done is to get people like South Africa, in particular, as the hegemon in the region, to take action, you know, to move into Mozambique, to institute a dialogue process among Mozambicans as a matter of urgency, but at least to quell the violence that's taking place. This is more than urgent, in my view.
And it certainly has a direct impact on the economy of South Africa. And we did see that with the shutdown of the border and the violence that was breaking out there. But unfortunately, we also know that our president won't be attending. It's our deputy president that will be there. Our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is closing up, I imagine, the G20 summit. But, you know, if we look, and this is a very important issue as well, is we look at what Mnangagwa now, because he's obviously heading up the SADC. That's why this meeting is happening in Zimbabwe and in Harare. I mean, we saw that there was not much when it came to the elections. You mentioned that last year with SADC intervention. There wasn't much they could do. And there is this feeling that SADC has a legacy marked by the organization's diplomatic constraints and the unfortunate entrenched allegiances to so many of these ruling liberation movements. And this is at the heart of what many say is the problem of SADC. Do you share these sentiments? Do you think that is the problem, that it is more committed to the leaders than it is to the people of the region?
Yes, it's all boys club, as people say. That's very true, except that now we are seeing it blatantly demonstrated before our eyes. I mean, take the case of Mnangagwa, who's the current chair representing Zimbabwe as he does. It's rotational, so there's nothing significant about it in my view. But it does raise important questions, especially with regard to Mozambique. The purported chair of SADC makes a statement at a party congress meeting, congratulating Chapo, even before the Electoral Commission in Mozambique had pronounced itself on the matter. So you have a situation in which one might say the chair is conflicted. And how does he mediate when he has already taken sides, so to speak?
Yeah.
We have a problem, a big problem. And Mozambicans are correct in raising legitimacy questions around that. And secondly, you have a situation in which Zimbabweans, figures allegedly, 289,000 Zimbabweans voted in elections in Mozambique. If that's true, it speaks loud at the flagrant nature of elections, fraudulent nature of elections in our region, at least in Zimbabwe and Mozambique.
You know, we see, and just to wrap up this conversation, because it is disheartening to see, because this is really an organization that we do hope can bring into clarity many of the regulations that should be adhered to. I mean, the regional governance structures that are in place should be adhered to, and there should be some form of adherence or compliance among the member states, but it feels like there isn't. But at the same time, there's absolutely no response or mechanisms, enforcement mechanisms available to SADC, because, you know, this is another thing. So, I mean, you know, if we get onto a page where it says, SADC says, all right, well, you know, something needs to be done, what can they honestly actually do?
Well, we'll see today, but almost predictably and inevitably, it will be business as usual, history repeating itself, and the disaster continues until, as often happens in our region, in Africa, we have external factors having to intervene. Already, you have a situation in which the Mozambican situation is so messy already. I mean, I think the French are involved through Kagame's forces in Cabo Delgado, in support of a company, Total. So you have a situation in which our region, and not to mention our continental body, the AU, appears lame in the face of crisis across the continent.
All right, Prof.
We are indeed in a mess, no doubt about that.
Yeah, Prof.
Depressing, yes.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately, but I think we get the gist of it, and also the weight that this particular gathering does hold. This could be a turning point, and it certainly is a very critical moment for SADC and the gathering to bring human rights and democratic integrity back into the spotlight. Professor Ibbo Mandaza, Zimbabwean academic and author, publisher, thank you very much for joining us. Let's take a break. We'll see you after this with the news at 8.